Hello and welcome to the 1916 podcast. I'm Tommaso here with Armand Johnston and a very special guest. Calling in from across the pond, it is Rikki from Scottish Watches. Rikki, welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Tim. It's been a while since we've had a good chat.
It has indeed. Well, there's no better icebreaker than a quick wrist check, so it's later in the day where you are. Why don't you sound off first?
Well, I thought I would parade one of my favourite watches, one I picked up end of last year, and a watch that was around about 4 years in the making, and that is my Moser Memeliner. This is based on the Streamliner that everybody knows. It's a firm favourite across the land, not just here in Scotland, but obviously across in the States and further beyond there. And this was a joke that was put together probably around about the first time we had the guys from Moser on the podcast. And what we did was, we are known for making fun of watches in the industry. It's Swiss. People like to have a joke and a laugh at their expense. We do it, the Australians do it. Perhaps you guys in the States are a little bit more clinical. You've got to toe the line a little bit more. But Ed kind of got on board with our jokes and he designed the Memeliner. Unfortunately, we had that pandemic thing happen and the idea got shelved for around about 3 years. And in the end of last year, finally, we thought, you know what, the joke has passed, too much time has gone under the bridge. Why don't we just take this dial, pop it in one of these watches, and I will just take it and wear it instead of it going to waste. So instead of this turning into a practical joke with the Scottish flag on the dial, it ended up in my own personal watch. So that is the Moser Memeliner, not the Streamliner that I'm wearing today.
I think you probably got us beat, but Armand...
I'm in agreement there. That is awesome. Yeah. I have never seen that. That is so cool, Rikki. Thank you for sharing.
Well, I don't have a meme watch, and my watch didn't take a year to make, so I feel left out, but I'm wearing my Tommaso edition Sartori Biard SB04. It's a special model we created for the Talking Time with Tommaso Facebook group. We have opened up purchasing to non-members because it turned out to be pretty popular and Armand wanted to offer it more broadly. So I have at least the distinction of the only French-made watch among the three of us. All right, so for those of you listening out in cyberspace, we're going to take a look at watches for summer 2024. Now, we've got a broad range of price points and styles. There should be something for everyone. But these are watches that are summery. And since this is the first day of summer, we are sounding off. Rikki, why don't you lead us away? What have you got for summer 2024?
Well, I suppose if we're talking something that's kind of new, hip and happening, I would go with the recently released, instantly sold out manga series from Casio G-Shock. This hit our desk around about a month ago there. It had been kind of teased for a while, and eventually a box did arrive thanks to UPS. Inside was some new packaging, which I hadn't seen before from G-Shock, very ecologically friendly, unlike the stuff we'd seen in the past. And inside was this half-tone, kind of sketch, cut-out, artistic pop style of a watch. Very reminiscent of the original, dare we say, Casio, the 2100 series, but using a very matte effect on the actual case, the dial, and the resin strap. I was going to say bracelet, but the resin strap. It works, and it works very well. You cannot take a bad picture of this thing. I have tried, and I'm not the greatest photographer in the land, but it is fantastic. It is a fantastic summer watch that could be worn all year round. So that is my first pick for summer watch.
So this is basically a Casio with manga on it.
No, it's called the manga series. I think it's due to the art style and the way that inking would have been done in comic books across in that neck of the woods. So this one here, it's got very heavy on the ink outlines, and it has got half toning in the centre of the resin strap, also just underneath the bezel at the top and the bottom of the watch head. But it's quite reminiscent of the D1 Milano sketch series that came out and always seems to be in stock and instantly out of stock. But this one came in a kind of off blue, light cyan, and they've also got a kind of off-white grey colour, depending on how it looks in the light. But no, fantastic looking watch and fairly inexpensive when it came out. I think it was around about $99.
Very nice, Armand. What do you have?
I just love the pop art stippling on that. I love the accent. That's an awesome pick and good color. The white one's cool too. My first pick on my list is, not to, have an echo of our earlier Streamliner, but the Streamliner Alpine Limited Pink is my pick for a summer watch. I absolutely love Streamliner on the rubber strap, which I didn't expect to. I think it is a bracelet watch and looks best on the bracelet.
This is a Moser for those who might be listening and wonder where we're going with this.
Yes, my apologies. H. Moser and C. Streamliner Alpine Limited Edition. I just love the fact that they did something a little bit different. Again, they put it on a strap. They skeletonized the movement. They made the time. They moved the timekeeping portion closer to the 12 o'clock, and you have a translucent pink disc of a dial, with the rest of the watch being open work. So lots going on in the watch, but very summery, very bright, and a little bit different than most Streamliners.
Okay, so that's way up the tech tree. What kind of pricing are we looking at for that?
Retail on that piece, I believe, was $120.
Okay, so this is a very like 1916 Co type watch. So if you don't want a Journe sports watch this summer, this might be the direction you go in. So I'm going to split the.
Is this the Formula One one we're talking about here?
I think it is.
Yeah, the Alpine Limited Edition, the Alpine Formula One.
That was the Miami Grand Prix debut.
It was.
I think those are already all sold out too.
They are, yeah.
Okay. So a lot of people, well, not a lot of people, but enough people agreed with you that one went fast.
Now there is a blue edition as well. I do prefer the pink.
Okay, so I'm going to try to play this down the middle. Not a very accessible watch, but also not real estate prices in certain parts of the American Midwest. So I'm going to go with a watch most people forgot existed because it came out too soon for the integrated bracelet sports watch craze, and that is the 70s chronograph Panorama Date. Now, this came out in 2014, and full bracelet, stainless steel, 40 millimeters. It's got everything going for it, and for $15,300, you know, we're talking that famous Geneva chronograph style money, but without the weight, and 100 meters water resistant, 40 mil, automatic. It's got the Brogioli quick adjust built into the clasp. That's a nice feature to have. It uses Glasuta Original caliber 3702. So you get a 70-hour power reserve indicator, column wheel, vertical clutch. It is a flyback, and this one's got a fascinating spring green dial. So it is lacquered at Glasuta's Forsheim dial manufacturer that they've owned for the last decade or so. So it's got this lovely gradient from really bright green at the center to, I would say, almost like a British racing green at the edge. It's got a really nice smoked fade. It's like the kind of thing Moser would do, but the watch itself is more in the vein of the Nautilus, the Royal Oak, the Laureato, that 70s sort of vision of a sports watch. And I think it just hit the market too soon. If this had come out in 2020 or 22, like in its initial offering, it would have been a hit.
I think Glasuta had a lot of fun with this watch as well. You know, there's a yellow dial version, which is my personal favorite. But there is a salmon version. There's also a Tiffany blue version. There's an emerald green version, and I give my fair share of flack to companies with too many SKUs. But in this case, I love that you have options, and it is actually extremely Nautilus adjacent in a strange way.
Yeah, and it's $15,300, so I feel like because it has been out for a while, you've also got the option to find one used, which is something I usually recommend to people. They did come out with a cool double edition of 100 pieces in 2023. The green dial came out in 22, and so you have Golden Bay, which is sort of a warm ochre tone, and then Ocean Breeze, which is sort of like a cerulean blue. Really attractive watches, and this is something that, you know, if you just want one watch for summer, you can dress it up, you can dress it down. They have straps, but get the bracelet. I always tell people, get the stupid bracelet, put it in the box, and then get the strap as an accessory, because it's always better value to get it with the bracelet. So, Rikki, you're up again. You've got 3 really interesting pieces because they're all accessible. Lead us to the next one.
I don't know what one to grab next. I'll grab the nearest one, and this is a pickup we got last year from the guys at Zodiac. They'd been doing great things over the past few years, lots of collabs, lots of funky colours, and I believe this was the first time they started to play around with ceramics. This one in particular is the Super Seawolf. Comes in various different colourways. Believe it's still available on the new market plus the pre-owned, and this one is slightly different from most ceramic watches, as in it's less expensive because it has got a stainless steel tub inside. So imagine a standard watch in steel, but then it has a shroud of ceramic on the bezel and actually on the case itself. The one I've got here has got orange highlighting in centre around the actual minute track on the strap, and then you've got the minute hand itself plus the top of the bezel. I really like this one. It absolutely captures the light outside, reflects it, but because it is ceramic, it has that, I don't know, subsurface scattering. Don't know if anyone will realise what I mean by that. It absorbs a slight amount of light and then it bounces it back, as only ceramic can kind of do. So I really do like this one, and it was fairly inexpensive. I believe it's around about $2,000 with the quote STP in-house movement inside. So quite a cool little summer watch and one I enjoy wearing.
Yeah, now Zodiac is an interesting brand because it's an old brand, an old Swiss brand that was typically associated with, I think, like blue-collar divers in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. It's the kind of thing that would have been like an alternative to, say, like a Tudor Submariner back in the day. And my grandpa really loved Zodiac watches. He had a couple of different Seawolves. One of the best qualities was that a lot of their bezels were acrylic capped, so they had this wonderful, lustrous, rich look. Do you get that same sort of aesthetic from the ceramic on this one?
It's hard to say, and it's acting completely different here with the studio lights indoors versus outdoors. It almost looks translucent, like a jellyfish here, but outside it definitely does have a slightly different appeal. I would say that the bezel and all the parts on it here, because they are ceramic, they are different. I think they've moulded them on the stainless steel version, so maybe it feels slightly rough when you actually activate.
It's got a vintage look to it. It's like deliberately straight lug, flat crystal, like 70s aesthetic.
Slight dome to crystal, not completely flat, but you are on the money with that one. And the typography and the iconography and the actual dial there, the font there is very, very vintage. And they've mixed 1, 2, 3 different styles of font, and usually that's a no-no, but it actually works quite well in the dial here. Subtle creaming to the starburst, I suppose you could call it, dial in the centre, leading off to the side, and the handset is very vintage, I would say very 70s inspired, but add it all together and it actually works.
Yeah, so of course, Zodiac, the Fossil Group's sort of luxury arm, these are Swiss watches with Swiss movements, as you mentioned, STP, for about $2,000. That's a great selection. Armand, where are you going with this?
All right, so I'm going in descending order. My first was kind of the pie in the sky, and my next is... Well, when I think of summer watches, for me, the buck kind of stops at fun. How fun is the watch? Will I wear it, in the sun, having fun? What color is it, basically? So my next two are based off of that, and I really, really love the Breitling Super Ocean, the new automatic 42 millimeter with rainbow markers, and specifically the teal blue strap. I think that's an awesome summer beater, and it has pops of color. It's got some fun. It is a time-tested model from Breitling in terms of water resistance and grab-and-go ability, and I think they nailed it with the colorways. I love it.
Okay. Are we talking about the Breitling Super Ocean Heritage 57 specifically?
No, I'm sorry. I'm talking the Super Ocean 42. So
okay.
It's a relatively new release, I think, this year, actually.
Yeah, because the first thing that comes to mind when you talk about rainbow, was the 2020 pandemic year relief edition of the Heritage 57.
Now, I like that watch, but I kind of found it a little bit confused because Heritage and rainbow colors generally don't necessarily go hand in hand to me. And yes, that's the piece I'm...
Yeah, okay. Now I got the Breitling website open. Okay, yeah, I see exactly where you're going with this. Very cool piece. I like it. It's summery. It's fun. But I'm going to do something a little bit different here and go back in time because my specialty is kind of historical perspective. And I think back in 2009, Piaget released one of the best summer watches of all time. And it just fell into the void. Everyone immediately forgot the 30th anniversary Polo 45 flyback chronograph, and this watch is incredible. So what did it have? Well, how about titanium, 100 meters water resistant, flyback chronograph, GMT, manufacturer automatic caliber, a hybrid bracelet strap with 2 micro adjustments built into the clasp. And the whole thing is dress watch thin at 12.7 millimeters. And it looks like a traditional Polo. Gadroons, oval case. It was very much a tribute to what the Polo had been prior to the Nautilus like 2016 Polo S. Now this watch, when it was new, you would have paid 18,900 US dollars, which in real money today, inflation adjusted, that's over 28 grand. Now you can pick this watch up between $11,000 and $14,000, depending on how complete it is and whether it's got the full set. For me, that's a lot of watch. That's a watch that can be your only watch. That's a high horology brand. The finishing on the movement is what you'd expect from like a JLC or an AP. So this is a watch with real credibility behind it, and a brand that, Richemont owned, is going to be around forever to provide parts and service. You can go out and find one of these things. I'm not going to say cheap, but for money that is outrageous for the quality you get and what it cost when it was new.
We were discussing this piece a little bit yesterday, you and I actually, and I kind of stand by thinking that it is pseudo RM adjacent.
Maybe I guess in that it's a non-round case. I don't know what to compare it to. It looks to me like the love child of, I don't know, let's say a Cosmograph, a Millenary, and maybe a vintage Omega Dynamic. It's really hard to pigeonhole this and categorize it, but I love it. I think if you're okay with an oval-shaped watch, this is the ultimate do-it-all summer sports and dress watch.
Something about the integrated bracelet into the case, to me, like overall makes it look like almost a tonneau shapes, which is kind of giving me those RM feels. But I see your point with the kind of amalgamation of pieces that it is most similar to. I see Chronoscope fiercely in there.
Yeah, so if you want to kind of jump back in history and buy something that's not widely recognized but offers a ton of fun and value, this is a good way to do it. So that's sort of where I'm aiming. I think, not as accessible as a G-Shock and also not as crazy as a Moser Tourbillon, but this is something you can buy for like deluxe Omega money. All right, I think you got one more for us, Rikki.
I do indeed, and I'm going to play this one a lot closer to home. We're obviously based in Scotland, but as I like to say, created in Scotland, enjoyed across the planet, a little bit like Scotch. I have got a Studio Underdog. You were talking about pandemic releases, and Rich at Studio Underdog created his first masterpiece during the pandemic. I believe he was let go with the company he used to work for. They produced, inexpensive plastic licensed toy watches from different brands, including Star Wars, Disney, etc. He took his design prowess and decided to make something himself. It has been the master stroke, and he has taken over the world since then. Everything from pizza watches to various definitions and variations of his O1 and his O2 styling. This is the OG, the original Studio Underdog Watermelon, and I think it's fantastic. It still stands up, and being his premier hit, it's got nothing wrong with it. Usually you can look at something and say, if only he had done such and such. Every marker is perfect on us. Every little subtle design cue, it just is 100% on the money, and you usually can't see that with somebody when they branch out on their own. There's always a little something that can be improved, and even with his O2 series, I think it's just as good. On the back of this one of the party pieces is an inexpensive movement that you can see straight through the case back, that being that inexpensive seagull. You can probably tell us a little bit more about this one, Tim, because you're the master when it comes to mechanisms.
I mean, here's the thing. If you were to just flash that in front of someone, you'd be like, hey, take a look at my vintage Venus chronograph. They'd be like, oh, yeah. The fact that it could pass for something that is a lot more expensive at a glance is already a declaration of victory. I think the best thing I can say about this watch isn't that it gives you a credible mechanical manual wind chronograph caliber. That's almost incidental. Yeah, I'm all about tech, and I love to talk about engineering, but the single standout feature of this watch is that when I look at it, I can taste it. It's literally that vibrant. It is a watch that is called the Watermelon, and you could not, if you were to create a mental picture of what a watermelon-themed chronograph would look like, this is it. It's got color, it's got texture, it's got vintage cues in the right places, used ironically, not in earnest. There's no plagiarism of the past here. This is almost like, what could I describe this like? This is almost like John Lennon painting his Rolls-Royce psychedelic colors. It's taking the tropes of something that is staid and stodgy and establishment and making it thoroughly fun-loving and just completely irreverent. That's what I have to say about that watch. I'm not even going to touch on the tech.
Perfect. Couldn't have said it better myself.
So now we're going to kind of transfer to a topic that, and I've got a great transition point here, but we were talking about summer watches, and we came from a place of value with Rikki and the watermelon, which was actually nominated for the 2023 GPHG Challenge Prize. And we've got this sort of GPHG bridesmaid feature where we're going to discuss the watches that should have won in the categories. Armand is going to focus on the Aiguille d'Or because I think he wants to look at like what should have been the best watch of the year and then what wasn't. I'm going to opine that last year, the Studio Underdog Watermelon should have been the winner of the Challenge Prize. Now, the Challenge Prize is the most accessibly priced category at the GPHG, which is basically the Swiss Oscars of watchmaking. And what actually won that year was the Raymond Weil Millésime Automatic Small Second. If you want something that's inoffensive, this could be your watch. But if you want something that feels like you're just having too much fun for the money you spent, I thought the Studio Underdog Watermelon should have been the Challenge Prize winner last year.
To see the watermelon as an option next to the other watches in the runnings, and to not have that picked, that seems outrageous to me because it's just granted, this is a personal opinion, it is the best looking piece of the bunch.
Yeah, it's an absolutely awesome watch, and compared to, look, some of the other stuff, there was a Nomos Club Campus 38, there was a Seiko 1968 Diver GMT reinterpretation, a very cool, timeless HMS 003, but I would say the Timeless and the Studio were the best watches, and neither one of them got the nod. I think this is just a case of the award going to the establishment, and in kind of entry-level luxury, that's Raymond Weil and brands like it. So I thought that was a miss. That should have been one of the laureates for 2023. Armand, I know you got feelings about the Aiguille d'Or, so why don't you take us to the equivalent of Best Picture.
Absolutely.
And tell me who should have won in what year.
Yeah, so I did a lot of digging in this. I did a lot of looking and reading. The one that really, really stuck out as the most egregious to me was 2001's. So we have to go far back for this one. And I think, is that the first GPHG?
Yeah, I believe that was.
So in 2001, the Aiguille d'Or went to the Vacheron Constantin Lady Kala.
It went to a big jewelry watch, right?
A big jewelry watch. Now, what was in the running at the time was the FP Journe Resonance, which absolutely unequivocally should have won that year, and not because I'm a Journe fanboy. Well, partially because I'm a Journe fanboy, but when compared, I've looked at that literally this morning and was just blown away because the Lady Kala is a hot jewelry piece. It is baguette markers, time only, unremarkable horology.
Watches like that are the reason the jewelry watch prize was created. Because
Exactly.
I think they decided that they were going to try to have like a craft art and jewelry segment so that mechanical exception could be recognized and overall significance could be recognized, and we weren't just going to aggregate the value of all the gems invested and then give the award to that watch. So I'm going to focus, I guess, on this most recent year. We talked about the Studio Underdog Watermelon. That was, of course, Challenge Prize for watches that are very accessible. But last year, the prize went to the Audemars Piguet Code 1159 Ultra Complication, which, in my opinion, was not an elegant grand complication. Yes, it was a perpetual calendar, minute repeater, chronograph split second, and it added a tourbillon, which is traditionally not necessary to have a grand complication, which is why they called this an ultra complication. But it is very thick, it is very large, it's built on their standard automatic winding base, which is an unremarkable core for something that should be entirely bespoke from crystal to crystal. I thought it was an interesting exercise in excess. I did not think it was as brilliant as Simon Brett's Chronomètre Artisan. Now, Simon Brett, for those of you who may just be new to his name, he has been behind the scenes on a lot of famous indie brand watches through the years. He's most famous for collaborating with MB&F, particularly on some of the legacy machines. So this is a great example of a super talented watchmaker releasing a watch that in many ways is going to be for him what the Chronomètre Contemporain was for Recep Recep'i. And on its merits, it's just beyond beautiful. It's only a 3-hand watch with sub-seconds. It's just one of those watches where every single piece seems like it could be in a gallery under a loupe. Every single piece feels like a jewel. Whereas with the Audemars Piguet, I would say probably most of the parts that you can see, and undoubtedly all the parts you can't see, feel like industrial products. I thought Simon Brett should have gotten the Aiguille d'Or for the Chronomètre Artisan, and I am happy that he did win the Horological Revelation Prize, but I feel like this is almost like a door prize for a guy who should have taken home the big trophy.
I also feel like the 1159 is a little bit confused of a model line in general. I have a relatively normal discussion that I have with collectors that my opinion is that 1159 should have only been saved for high horology pieces. Now, besides the point, this is outrageously high horology, don't get me wrong. But I agree with you. It is... there's something that... it's missing a je ne sais quoi that's just...
It seems like a brute force solution to something that should be done with poetic grace. It's like they threw all their engineering resources at putting this stuff in a Code 1159 case, and they got there, but the result feels forced.
And not evocative of the brand.
Yeah. Now, I'm not asking them to put out another Royal Oak by any means, but I think you need to have grace first, and you build from there, which is why F. P. Journe starts by drawing a dial when he creates a new watch, rather than engineering it from the inside out and starting with the movement, because he understands. Aesthetics, 99% of the reason we buy a watch. We make these excuses as men that it's actually about engineering, when what we're really buying is jewelry, and jewelry has to have grace. I don't know how you feel about that, Rikki.
Is that not why people buy Ferraris? They don't buy them for reliability, do they?
No, and you know what? I don't think they buy them for the fuel economy. Like, I think we're killing sacred cows here.
No, it's all to do with the retina.
Yeah. So, I'll hit another one, because the first year I was a member of the GPHG Academy was 2022. And I was fortunate enough to go to Geneva that year and see all of the nominated watches in one place on the eve of the ceremony. And first of all, I don't know what the hell they were thinking letting me in. That's crazy. That there was a madman in the building. But being there was one of the best experiences of my life in watches. And the people I saw, the watches I experienced, and the perspective I got, it's very different than when you're looking at them on the GPHG website and they're flat and featureless. The coolest watch I saw in 22 was actually nominated for the Petite Aiguille, which is a lower price category just above challenge. So think watches like, for example, the Zenith Dayfi Skyline, Grand Seiko Spring Drive GMTs, the Breitling Top Time Triumph Edition, stuff like that. I saw the Gelfman IN16 Nixie wristwatch, and it was not just the best watch in the Petite Aiguille running. It was the coolest thing in the whole building. Now, this was for 6,000 Swiss francs. This is literally a Nixie clock for your wrist. So 2 vacuum-style glass tubes with tungsten filaments that give you numerals 0 through 9, and it is like having a big old Russian nuclear reactor on your wrist with these huge phosphorescing, glowing tungsten numerals on your wrist, jumping up and down inside tubes that look like something that would be used to contain plutonium. Oh my gosh, this crazy watch should have been something that everyone in the world knew about that year. And forget the Petite Aiguille, it should have been Aiguille d'Or. Like, this thing was crazy. To this day, it's still the coolest wristwatch I've ever seen in person. How this didn't win anything, much less the big prize, I'll never understand. But you can go out, look up Gelfman, and I believe his name is Ilya Gelfman, and it's the IN16 Nixie. I feel the same way I felt when I first saw the Devon Tread, only this is more impressive than the Devon Tread. That's the only way I could describe it.
I'm a little bit embarrassed I didn't know it existed until now.
Yeah,
really?
Yeah, no, this watch in particular, I've seen these vacuum tubes in practice in principle, but not this particular piece.
This style of watch is what Steve Wozniak tends to favour. He's been spotted out and about over the past couple of decades wearing very similar Nixie tube watches.
Yeah, now this is not the first Nixie watch, just to be clear, but it is an interesting one because it integrates a lot of modern technology, such as microprocessors, rechargeable lithium-ion batteries. They get a 7-day power reserve, USB rechargeable for this thing. Now, I know a lot of people have all sorts of doubts about electronics and luxury watches, and I think we just need to get over that, because if something is built to last to a high standard of quality, then as long as it's a luxury product that meets your expectations for function, fit, finish, and longevity, I mean, heck, we've got Swatch watches from the 80s that still work. I've got a G-Shock from the 90s that still works. The Nixie tubes often used on these things are decades old. So if you want the longevity, yeah, you can get it. There's a difference between Happy Meal quality electronic watches and the kind that cost 6,000 francs. So I thought the Gelfman Nixie wristwatch was the coolest watch of 2022, and it should have taken home all the awards. It's just like comedy writers should win every Emmy and every Oscar because it's the hardest thing to do. I think coming up with something that looks eye-poppingly cooler than every other watch at the GPHG requires some mandatory recognition. So that's how I felt about that. So, guys, you can go out and you can get that IN16 Nixie. It's still available.
You know, one thing I noticed as I was like just digging in and doing research, and I know this is going to be the case with any type of quote unquote awards show or program, but just the amount of entries that increase year after year.
I am of the opinion that there are just flat out too many categories.
I agree with you. I totally agree with you. I think a lot of them can be consolidated.
Yeah, just like there are too many Emmys and Academy Awards, like this could be pared down. And I'll also say this. The nomination project is a long one, but it does ultimately require that the brand consents to be nominated and submits a watch to be considered. So I can't, for instance, force Tudor to participate by nominating a watch. Tudor has to propose a watch, then it has to be selected and nominated for an award, and then ultimately Tudor can win a category. So brands are able to throw a kill switch to prevent themselves from appearing. It's almost like that old episode of Seinfeld where he kept saying, "I choose not to run," because he didn't want to be beaten in a foot race. Well, you can't be beaten if you don't run. And that's sort of how the GPHG works.
What are your thoughts as to some a brand that you would like to see back in it or in it in general?
I guess I would like to see more German brands. Where's Moritz Grossman in all this? You know, where's Glasuta Original? Why does it feel like we never see Lange? Back in the day, they won the Aiguille d'Or in 2009 with the Zeitwerk. I would love to see Lang und Heine, which I think has the best finish of any brand in the world. And, you know, I think there are a lot of German brands of considerable merit, including smaller ones like Felipe Pikulik, who's just establishing himself as a watchmaker. These brands should be in there. I think there's a lack of international representation. Often you see Japanese watches in like the lower price categories, but yeah, I think that it's still too Swiss. That's the main problem.
To that point, you know, American watchmaking, call it RGM, called Cameron Weiss. You know, there some, obviously not for the highest end awards, but there are awards in there that would be interesting to see those guys.
Yeah, where's Josh Shapiro?
Yeah,
I agree with that.
Yeah, Shapiro's a great.
I'd heard from certain avenues that certain brands would not put themselves forward because they wouldn't want to lose and then have people say, "Oh, they lost," not naming any names, but particular brands that do not appear.
I think that's a good way to put it. I think with respect to that, if you are perceived to be on the top, sometimes there's nowhere to go but down. If you win, of course you did. If you lose, how could you? That's sort of how they view it.
I'm not sure if I'm alone in this, but do you guys think that the quote unquote losers of the category, I don't think they get any negative press in this.
No, if you are nominated and you're viewed as an underdog that got in there, you know,
it's a win.
pun intended, but Studio Underdog got a lot of exposure for having been nominated for a category. Most brands that I've seen nominated actively promote the fact that they were GPHG pre-selections. I think almost everyone who doesn't have an unassailable image, who doesn't have decades or centuries of establishment behind them, would love to be considered. Again, there are some whose prohibitive position in the industry make it feel like they've got nothing to gain, and I can understand that. And I'm sure it's also a committee decision at that level, so if they don't have consensus, it doesn't matter if half the people were in favor and half the people weren't. But yeah, I think I would love to see more non-Swiss brands, and I would love to see more Americans, because there are quite a few people in the United States now doing amazing things. Artur Akhmayev should be recognized for his engraving. Oh yeah, go for it, Rikki.
Just because of the lag, it's difficult for me to interpret when to jump in, so sorry for speaking over you there.
No, it's okay.
Well, a couple of notable ones pop into mind from the last couple of years that aren't Swiss. So we had Grand Seiko with the Kudo that won, I believe. And we've also had, on the flip side of that, money-wise, Sega Design with their Blue Planet that picked up a prize. So those are the only ones that stand out to me as being non-Swiss.
Yeah, and I would love to see Garrick in it. Like, I think Garrick makes watches from, the like £6,000 to £40,000 range. I would love to see them competing. They certainly have a number of new models on a regular basis. They don't really stand pat. They continue to come out with new products. I'd love to see them in there. I would love to see some of our Irish watchmakers in there. I'm like wondering, where are the McGonigal brothers? I think there's a lot of watchmaking taking place in the world now in so many places that we should have. And maybe it's always going to be a Swiss competition, and I appreciate that. But I do think that some of the people who are on the margins of like nations that are not considered to be mainstream watchmakers, like, where's Aaron Beche in all this with his multi-axial tourbillons, his extraordinary level of engraving, his distinctive styles? Where is David Walter? I mean, probably one of the few peers and contemporaries of Derek Pratt and George Daniels who's still practicing and still alive and active. You could still get a watch from him. I would love to see him submit something just to show the world he exists, because people don't know about that.
There's a female watchmaker. I believe she's British.
Rebecca Struthers.
No, I'm blanking on it. She specializes in kind of tank adjacent.
Eva Leubach.
Yes, thank you.
She was nominated a few years back. Yeah, I believe she's German. She worked out of Australia for a long time, and I think now she's in. I want to say she works outside of Zurich.
Outrageous work.
Yeah. And yeah, I would love to see like Nicholas Hacko and Son, out of Australia submitting watches. I feel like with enough slots under Challenge and Petite Aiguille, people who are not making super expensive or complicated watches can have a fighting chance. But with categories like men's watch too, you're also in a position to give an award to someone who makes just an all-around competent standout product without concern for price or segment. You can really fit an awful lot under the banner of men's watch. Probably almost every watch in the competition. So now I have a selection for, by the way, people are probably asking, when was the Kodo a laureate? It was the Chronometry Prize winner in 2022. Back in 2009, I certainly had some objections about what won and what didn't. So, okay. Back in 2019, in the Petite Aiguille category, there was understandably a lot of admiration for the Stefan Kudoka 2. But I thought the most interesting watch in the Petite Aiguille category that year was the David Rutten Streamline. David Rutten makes meteorite-cased watches, and the DR01 Streamline was probably the most interesting watch in the competition that year. It almost looks like something from Fritz Lang's Metropolis. It looks like something right out of the peak of the Art Deco era, like the interior of an ocean liner or the top of a skyscraper. Made of meteorite with these lovely vertically oriented gadroons. It's sort of a rectangular watch that looks like the old 1920s Cartier Tank à Guichet, but on steroids. Jumping hours, scrolling minutes, meteorite case. It's got a 5-day Chris Ward-based mechanical movement inside of it, and it was under 10,000 Swiss francs, and it was easily the most eye-popping watch that year. I loved that thing. I thought it should have been a category winner. As much as I like Stefan Kudoka, he makes a very handsome, clean, subtle watch. This thing almost reminds me of why I fell in love with watches in the first place. The meteorite case, the crazy style, the jumping hour, the total imagination, like completely unimpeded by practicality or convention. I thought that should have won in 2019, and I've been pretty vocal about that. It seems like a lot of the watches that we're picking that should have won were watches that should have won price point categories. I'm just noticing that now.
That's an interesting, yeah, that's funny.
The other thing, too, was I thought that in 2019, the iconic category, which is almost a category for watches that don't change, they gave the award to the Audemars Piguet Royal Oak Jumbo in white gold with the salmon dial. Rikki, you remember that one, the white gold Royal Oak with the salmon dial?
They all kind of blend together, really.
Yeah, and that's exactly why I didn't think it should have won the category, because the watch that didn't win, the IWC tribute to Paul Weber, was a crazy watch. It was a Zeitwerk for 1/4 the money. Jumping hours, jumping minutes, a pocket watch you could wear on your wrist, a movement only ever used in that watch. And it wasn't a Portugueser, it wasn't a Portofino, it didn't fit into any existing IWC model line, and unlike the Tag Heuer Monaco or the Hamilton Intramatic or the Royal Oak from Audemars Piguet, it wasn't a watch that had been available decades prior or for decades consecutively. It was something totally new that looked like it could have been around forever, and I think that is the ultimate icon, something that is a feat of imagination but looks so natural that you feel like it could have been around at any point between now and the 1880s. This watch was incredible, and I thought it should have won. I thought it should have been more than a nominee in the iconic prize. I thought it should have been like best men's watch or something, or at least the iconic winner. Giving the award to another Royal Oak, it's almost like a facepalm moment.
So AP had a relative sweep that year, actually, with the their perpetual calendar Ultrathin winning the Aggie d'Or, with the complication prize going to the 1159 Super Sonnerie. Those two, make a little bit more sense, although Aggie d'Or with the Ultrathin does not make sense to me. I have to go on record with that, but you're absolutely right. While the 15202 is iconic, the Paul Weber is a better watch.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, by the way, I don't know if you remember the politics around that white gold salmon dial Royal Oak, but initially it was going to be a very small production run. Then they announced the production run was going to be much larger.
Yes.
Then they announced that the production was going to be open-ended, but it would be a boutique exclusive. And it was largely because it came out the year that the 1159 collection ran into a media and collector buzzsaw of opinion. And so they're like, look, our fallback is a bunch of new Royal Oaks, and let's just sell as many as we can.
Limited edition turned limited production turned yearly production.
Yep. So that's how I kind of felt in 2019. There's no way AP should have walked away with 3 awards. And the only saving grace in 2019 was the watch I should have been, that I thought should have been the Aiguille d'Or, which was the Piaget Altiplano Ultimate Concept. I don't think it was submitted that year, even though it came out that year. It did come out as a production model the next year, and it did win the Aiguille d'Or in 2020. So I felt retroactively fulfilled.
I think this year was the innovation prize was spot on, although I would give innovation... I would give the Vacheron Twin Beat Perpetual a run at the title too, though. Honestly, I think that watch is amazing.
Oh, 65 hours of power reserve,
cool.
guys. If you forgot, it's a 43 millimeter case with 65 hours of power, days of power reserve.
Twin Beat, I mean that has Aggie d'Or written all over it, but I mean Innovation Prize does really nail that.
So let's sort of shift gears now. I want to sort of talk about the future, and this will kind of be our closing topic, but where do you guys see your own collections going? It's very rare that we can get all the 3 of us together. I'll just say I see a Blancpain 50 Fathoms in my future. Now that it's a 42, and mechanically and qualitatively, everything it's been. I loved the 45, but I couldn't marry it. It's just too big. I think I could buy the 5010, and in titanium, I think that might be my next watch. Rikki, where do you see yourself going with your collection?
I don't honestly know, because in the last 6 months, three heavy hitting pieces have turned up that I never expected. Got the Moser, I picked up a Magma Edition Freak X, and you mentioned Garrick earlier on. I picked up one of the limited edition Series 2. Something exceptional has to kind of pop up for me to actually spend the time to say I want that, because I'm in a privileged position where reviewing watches, the DPD, the FedEx guys constantly coming and going with bits and pieces. It's like being an automotive journalist and having a new supercar in the driveway every week. So I do not know where the future leads me, but I know it's going to lead me to Geneva Watch Days shortly. So stay tuned.
And I will see you there. Armand, you're the only one of the three of us who is professionally involved in trading on a daily basis. I'm more of kind of like a subject matter specialist. Rikki is a man of many talents. You know, he deals, he buys, he travels, he speaks, he teaches, and of course he promotes the hobby to newcomers and veterans alike. But you actually work in the buying and selling, so you've seen everything cross your desk. Based on that perspective, where do you see your collection going?
You know, this is something that I think about and talk about with clients and friends on a daily basis. And I think I have gotten too picky. I think my personal tastes have eclipsed what is possible sometimes.
Yeah.
So I do have to reel back my expectations and what I think of as what I want for a watch very often. The things that are low-hanging fruits to me, I very much want a yellow gold Patek. I want a yellow gold Gondola or Calatrava of some sort. Represents less than 10% of their production. Whereas, you know, steel is 25% of their production, give or take. The only rarer metal is platinum and, of course, the fabled titanium. And I don't know, yellow gold is a special material. And I also think Gondola is a looked aside line, and it's one that is extremely special. You know, a 5124J on a purple strap is a very me watch.
I almost bought one of those a couple of years ago, and it was perusing your website that I spotted it, and I actually got in touch with a guy that used to work with you to say, what's the chances of... It was around about when crypto started coming back, and all those bitcoins that I had sitting that had crashed to nothing had regained some kind of market share, and I thought, yeah, I quite like that, but I never really went for it. I got in the Raj Tourbillon that Tim actually did an on-the-wrist review back in Dubai in 2021, 60-second wrist review.
You know, that is a very cool way of getting into a tourbillon with Orage. I think people underestimate them. That is a true Swiss luxury level tourbillon for, you know, roughly what you would pay for a well-appointed Omega. And, you know, you get all of the small brand humanity and relationship and, you know, closeness to the creator. I think that's something I gotta, you know, keep us streaming, open a new window, but definitely check them out. You know, there have been a lot of watches that I love, but for one reason or another, it's either too expensive or I feel like the watch is a science project. But one thing that you can never go wrong with is an old American pocket watch. And I would love to own an Illinois Bun Special 23 Jewel 60 hour. You know, for me, you know, I think looking at watchmaking is sort of like the next level of how I can improve my ability to relate watches and explain watches. It's always great to see a beautiful pocket watch. There are very few things that George Daniels complimented, because he was kind of spare with his compliments and kind of grumpy in general. But he had beautiful things to say about American pocket watches, and we take for granted their quality and the impact they had on Swiss watchmaking when the Swiss came over during the American Centennial back in the 19th century, and they saw mass production of chronometer-grade watches with interchangeable parts, and they were shocked. And that changed everything about how Swiss watches were made from then on. And obviously the American, you know, watchmaking industry lapsed and was surpassed and gradually collapsed as a mass market force. But these watches still exist. And for what, $1,500, I could go out and buy something that represents pretty much the apex of the development of American railroad chronometers. Porcelain dial intact. So I think a Bun Special 23 Joule 60 hour. I would like to own that. For like $1,500 I could too.
That's a left field grab, and I love it.
All right. So let us promote all of our social medias. Rikki, if folks want to find you, where do they find you?
Best place is on Spotify or anywhere where podcasts are listened to, and just search for Scottish Watches. We're out twice a week.
You can also navigate to him using Google. If you prefer a search engine, Google Scottish Watches, it will take you right there. Armand, of course, you are associated with the buying and selling of watches. If people want to find you, where do they go?
Yes, sir. You can find me on the 1916 Company website. You can find me on Instagram at It's Me Armand, or you can find me on our YouTube channel sometimes with you, Tim.
I am, of course, Tim_Masso on Instagram if you want to follow my 1-minute videos. I am also everywhere on, 1916's YouTube channel and 1916 Watch Reviews. And just generally Google my name, Tim Masso. You can follow me down the rabbit hole. This is an interactive podcast. If you have questions, email them to podcasts@the1916company.com if you want to see your questions featured. Thank you so much to Rikki for joining us later in the day.
Thank you, Rikki.
Thanks a lot, guys, for having me.
Time out, Tim out, Armand and Rikki out, and thanks for logging on.